This should be an interesting session. We'll have a wide array of people here. I'll start with a common question to all the panelists as to what their own observation, initial observation in terms of the budget. I'd like to start with maybe Krishan as to, from a conglomerate perspective, what are your initial?
Firstly, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I'd like to congratulate the Finance Minister and the team at the Finance Ministry on this year's budget. I think one of the big positives is that it is consistent broadly with the policies that were laid down in the last year or two. So we haven't seen some of the ad hoc arbitrary changes that we had seen in past budgets. So congratulations, I think, to the team on that. I think some of the other efforts to broaden the tax base and expand the tax net, I think that is a big positive. Together with also, despite it being an election year, there is a continued effort at fiscal consolidation, and I again think that is a big positive, that we haven't lost the focus on that despite the temptation in an election year. Some of the others just directly relevant to business, the fiscal incentives on large investments. One of the concerns we had was with these capital allowances and so on, that there is no guarantee of continuity. And I think the reference, again, we need to see how it pans out, but the reference to having it in BOI agreements, hopefully, will to an extent be some kind of assurance of continuity of those tax incentives for specific projects. The other big positive broadly, I'll go into specifics, I think, later when Nista asks other questions, but the other one is on the construction industry and construction costs. Yes, it affects John Keys, but it's something that affects all of us, whether it's housing or hotels or apartments or malls. And I think the commitment to bringing down construction costs by reducing cessors and so on is a big positive. We get duty concessions through BOI agreements, but over the years there have been many other taxes that have been introduced that are over and above the concessions given in BOI agreements. And on large projects, we really feel it. You know, hotels, the Cinnamon Life project and so on, can be very substantial, and it's difficult to estimate at the outset. So I think that is another positive.
Thanks, Mr. Vijayavardhana. Your comments in the budget, you being a very vocal critic prior to the budget, so I'm sure
Nista, there was a wide speculation in the country among many of us that since it's an election year, this Kemas boy would come up with an election budget. Even the post-budget survey done by the Alumni Association of the University of Colombo had revealed that 37% of the people had viewed it as an election budget. But if you look at it purely from an economics point of view, it's not an election budget, because in an election budget, what we find is that the Minister of Finance might provide a bag of relief, which he called Sahana Malla, containing sprats, onions, dal, all kinds of goods, which the ordinary consumer would consume, and he might take pride in presenting that kind of Sahana Malla to people. Fortunately, the Minister of Finance had broken away from that tradition, and he had diverted the entire budget from consumption to investment. That's the main thing that I would see in the budget. He had allocated more funds for the development of the infrastructure. There is a physical capital infrastructure. Then the development of human capital, which is a must for Sri Lanka, if Sri Lanka wants to attain this high economic growth in the next period. And also he had gone along with the fiscal consolidation program, which he had introduced earlier in 2017, and therefore it has laid the foundation for any finance minister in the future to take the country forward. Unfortunately for him, the downside of the budget is that he has only 8 months period to implement it. And his officials, I think Manohar and Desal, will have to do a round-the-clock job in order to implement the budget proposals. And if he is able to raise the revenue which he has projected in the budget, in my view, this budget is a good budget, and it's a kind of a development budget. And as I had, in fact, warned the Minister of Finance in my articles in Daily FT, that he should concentrate on developing innovations and inventions, plus the development of the human capital in the country. He had exactly done what he had been warned.
Thank you very much for inviting me and giving this opportunity to address at this budget forum. In the perspective of the National Chamber of Exporters, we find quite a few proposals has been taken up and addressing to the rubber industry, the cinnamon industry, and so on. And I feel this is more, the budget is a more exporters-oriented budget, and they have given more for the trading and research and development, and more incentive, not incentives rather, for the development of the exporters. And in the perspective of women and women empowerment, because I'm being in the apparel industry, the major challenge we have is the workforce. They are giving the maternity leave allowance of, in any case we give that. The creche is a must in these days, because the women, they leave the job when they have a baby, and we have noticed, we have our own experience. After about 5-6 years, they come back to their work. So this gives a more easy for the women as well as for the employer to continue with the same workforce. And also, I believe this budget is more focused on development, with certain taxes has been reduced, especially the ESC. We being exporters, it was 0.5% ESC tax, which was before, and it has been reduced to 0.25%, and that takes a very large revenue impact for the exporters, which is for the betterment of the exporters. So this, I believe, is a more exporter benefited tax, the budget, as well as for the development.
I arrived in October 1st is when we started, and when I started here, and then what we observed from a multinational perspective, with coming at this from a lubricants and from FMCG point of view, is the crash of demand across our industries in the fourth quarter, which was quite difficult for the new guy in town to deal with. So what we see when we look at this budget around empowering people and nurturing the poor has a very positive impact for multinationals in Sri Lanka, because it indicates the spurring of demand, right? So and we're seeing the demand is good in our industry in the first quarter, and hopefully with this budget that'll continue. I think the positive signs from this budget around clear support for entrepreneurship and education, the broadening of education curriculum to include information technology in the curriculum is all good positive signs. And also quite positive was the recognition that the technology startups can quite often start with 5, 10, 15 people around a conference table and not 50 people. So providing the same tax benefits on the payroll taxes is quite positive. And then from a Chevron perspective, when I saw last night, or when I was reading through the budget around empowering women, was quite powerful, because as our company, we value inclusion and diversity tremendously. And so allowing for flexible work hours, improving the ability for women to find daycare and maintain their corporate jobs is aligned with how we do business across the globe. I think from a nurturing the poor perspective, investing in the underdeveloped parts of the country in the north and the east, in the fishery sector, and then requiring foreign construction firms to tie up with local entities. Those all are very positive signs. I think on the flip side, the concerns that I have around this budget are, one, the implementation timing, and then two, the revenue schemes. Because when I looked at them, it seems like the budget relies on sin tax and motor vehicle, and increasing the excise tax on importing motor vehicles. So inherently, those can have the effect of curbing demand, thereby reducing the revenues associated with those. So the question on my mind is, where's the revenue going to come from? Should those two schemes not meet the mark that the budget has established?
Thanks, Ben.
See, as a twin deficit country going into the 5th year with the IMF program, I think we are on a very narrow path as economy. In that context, I think we have presented a very reasonable budget, looking at some of the short-term goals as well as long-term goals. We can clearly see there are plans around improving balance of payment. There are exemptions on the foreign bondholders and NRFC flows. So NRFCs are very, very important. These foreign flows are very important for us, because as a country we are running with 3 months of imports basically on our reserves. It's over 6 billion now. If you look at the markets, we are operating in the emerging markets, comparative markets like in ASEAN, like they all got like 9 to 10 months of imports. So we are running with 3. So those are some of the larger challenges. On a FDI perspective, again, we see some capital allowances, exemptions on about 150% tax allowances coming your way for larger FDIs. Again, FDI is a very important part of sustainable development of the country, because we can't be running on a yearly budget and thinking, year on year, how do we make our numbers? Because FDIs will drive the long-term sustainability in the country. So we've done really well in 17 and 18. I think we have to continue that momentum. But if you compare as emerging market, are we doing enough? Not good, I would say. On the fiscal side, I clearly see a bit of a challenge. On the income side, 15% plus income is a bit of an optimistic target. The good news is most of it is coming from alcohol and tobacco, so there won't be a lot of stress to the daily expenses. On the tax income, again, 13% looks a bit optimistic. But coming from 11 to 13, I think we have to be happy. But again, if you compare with emerging markets of our size, markets are hovering around 16 to 17% of GDP to tax income ratio across markets. So again, we have to catch up on those areas. There are many things around, I think, Sihina Malika and Home Sweet Home and all of that. I think there's a lot of stress on the bankers to lend money at 6%. I just want to emphasize that, it's 11%, cost of funds is 11% nowadays, so somebody has to pay that bill, because banking as an industry, I know you all must be thinking that we are making a lot of money. As an industry, banking is going through a bit of a turmoil right now. You'll see in the papers very soon, like our ROI is actually coming down as an industry, and that's not very healthy for economy. So those are some of my sentiments, and Enterprise Sri Lanka, I think, is a big step forward. I think we started this last year. Now going into the second year, I think there were comments around how do we allocate these funds, are we monitoring enough? But I believe in SMEs. I think 80% of the GDP would come from SMEs, and there's about 47% of the workforce is working for SMEs in this country. So I think it's extremely important, look out to these SMEs and, take the country forward. So, yes, you can say it's an election budget, but I think there are a lot of things done to, have sustainable development of the economy.
So I just want to ask, Krishan, I know you mentioned lots of positives, but what do you think is a game changer in the budget, this budget? Just one thing that you feel that surprised you.
I think the effort to encourage female participation in the labor force is a game changer. if you can amend some of the laws around that to enable that, we see it in a big way in the hospitality industry. I think that is a big game changer.
You also mentioned welcoming the support for the construction sector. Just want to find out, government has now stipulated that foreign, getting foreign firms to tie up with local. I mean, you're a big developer. Is it's the direction welcome?
Well, it's good to encourage the local construction industry, but I think from a business point of view, getting the lowest cost of construction is what matters. So you have to get that balance right.
Manu, you have any idea as to what were the basis for? I see the positives, but there might be some flack.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons was that some of these foreign funded projects, particularly the government projects, not really the private sector projects, we found that there was very little retention to the local economy in various ways, One is obviously, those firms work for their shareholders and we felt there was an unfair level of retention to the local economy. That's one. Second one was when we spoke to the construction industry, they felt that since some of these fully foreign funded projects, in the government particularly, had various concessions in terms of their costs when they came in for a water project or a road project or whatever it is, that they would be in an advantageous position when they bid for other contracts, because they had equipment and stuff like that that were here, which then could be used for other contracts. So they felt that there was a bit of a topsy-turvy playing field when it comes to the local construction firms bidding in a fair manner. But I take Krishan's point that it's ultimately cost, right? And but we felt that in this proposal that we would give at least level that playing field, particularly contractors who come for the government projects. That was really the rationale. Not only private sector. Private sector has to decide on the best cost for their shareholders, because they can't entertain costs that are over the limit. But we found that for the government projects, we felt that this was a requirement for participation as well as technology transfer where it was required.
Yeah. A problem with the industry is that they say that the government contracts are fine, but you're very poor paymasters.
Generally, government there is no paymaster at all sometimes.
You're the culprit.
Yeah, but what happens is it's one of those vicious cycles, because when people do come into government contracts, I think they factor that into account, right? And as a result, I think delays are factored into their margins. Otherwise, they must be crazy to bid for government contracts. But it has a spiraling effect on cost, because ultimately we pay. And these are mostly not grants, they're actually loans. So, from our point of view, we have to ensure that the public gets a fair deal, that you don't have a loan just because you have funding if the costs are high. So it's one of those things. It's a vicious cycle which we need to release.
Thanks. Mr. Vijayawardena, from your perspective, what is the most sort of proposal that will have the most profound impact?
Well, I think he is trying to convert Sri Lanka from this simple technology-based economy to a high-tech based economy by promoting inventions and innovations across the board. That's the foundation has been laid, and the universities in Sri Lanka are being promoted as high-tech promoting institutions. Research institutions are being given additional funds, and also in the case of the educational reform, one of the most important reforms that had been proposed is that the segregation of students into different streams will be stopped along with the introduction of what is known as the STEM plus A, which is called, in my view, we call it STEAM, where we add arts and science together, so that science students will learn art and art students will learn science. As a result, we may be building in the future a a workforce which is flexible and also which has an ability to think and also be creative. Now, this is one of the most important education reforms that has been proposed in the budget, and I hope that any future government in Sri Lanka will follow this, and they will start educating people not in the line of various streams like science, commerce or arts, but of course taking them into together and allowing the students to build up the both sides of their brain, the subtle side as well as the intuition side, and we will be therefore creating a creative workforce rather than a workforce that is just developed into a segregated item. So that's one of the most important things that he has proposed in the budget.
Thanks. In the context of this item fiasco and then the sort of dead end for private universities, I mean, you think has government addressed that challenge, or is it still, the reforms are always taking time in terms of ideal change?
Already we all know that only 30,000 people will get places in government universities in Sri Lanka because of the lack of space, and balance 70,000 will have to either move out of Sri Lanka or they'll have to shift into some other kind of professional examinations like SEMA, marketing and so forth. So to fill the gap, there is now a large number of private universities which have come up, and the government as a policy is promoting the accreditation of the private institutions as degree awarding institutions. And when the students are to study in those places, those private universities have been encouraged to provide scholarships so that there will be this cross-fertilization of the best students with the students who have money to pay. But at the same time, the new proposal to provide an interest-free loan where they would be paying back it to the government of Sri Lanka in 15-year time period would be a good suggestion. And as a result, many of the students in Sri Lanka who are unable to get admission to a state university would be able to fulfill the aspiration of becoming graduates. So it's a good suggestion, and because even in my case, when I studied in late 1960s at the university, we actually studied on a loan given by the People's Bank. And after we joined the central bank, we started repaying the loan, and we completely repaid it. So it was actually made a private investment rather than a government investment.
Thanks. Deshal, just coming to Minister to refer to this Harvard and this. Is there a current arrangement by Harvard and all these institutions with another country like this? Is it just a sort of a fancy idea, or you think this has some real case for Sri Lanka to engage in such a direct scholarship?
So I think there is a very strong case for it. Of course, there's a lot of criteria that will have to be met because you automatically, just because you passes with a very good Z-score, it doesn't mean that you'll automatically get acceptance into those institutions. So we will have to, of course, support the additional work as well in terms of your English language qualifications and all the other elements to it. We have just started the discussions with these other universities. We've spoken to a couple already at an initial stage. And already, typically those universities also fund quite a few scholarships for students in the developing world as well. So I think we can leverage on some of those. But here the key is the government wants to actually to set aside the funding. So it will give a chance for a student who does qualify under other aspects, but is only unable to get in because of the financial factor. So that the government will make that commitment of 250 million rupees this year to provide the funding for those students who are able to qualify and get in.
Yeah, I know these schools have a program to get, but I'm asking whether do they have a kind of government arrangement with any other? No, right? So you're just having a fund as a support, but it will be up to the individuals to really get there, right?
It will be up to on the individual's merit, but the government will support it. So we will try to form an MOU with some of these entities to facilitate that and to make that process easier.
Okay, fine, thanks. Ramya, just what is your game, in your opinion, the game change in the budget?
As I said before, this is not at all a election budget. This is more for the, I think for development, and also to create more exporters by giving them certain areas for R&D, where they are, even for cinnamon they have created for training, and for rubber they have given certain areas to develop, and even all in all for exporters they have given certain areas to improve. I think this is and empowering the women.
Yeah.
You know, that carries a long way for the employees as well as for the women in the corporate sector.
Okay, right.
The women participation is in most of the industries is about 75%. So this can be reached, because at the moment they are not, so this can be reached with this sort of encouragement given in this budget.
There is an issue with the apparel industry, is that accommodation, decent accommodation for the particularly zoned staff and transportation. Those two factors not addressed.
Yeah, but in the apparel industry, we provide transport as well as accommodation.
The industry across, is it?
Yeah, we do that. And the recently what we discovered.
Unions of course say otherwise. I recently listened to a union, they're saying that this is the problem, that's why you can't.
But actually, there was a press article regarding this matter, which is not true. And JAF, they were taking it up with the EU Commission.
Okay, fine, thanks.
Very briefly, to add to that point, we have introduced, it has been mentioned in the budget, but in the Enterprise Sri Lanka loan scheme, a special loan which addresses this whole issue, where transportation for factories and manufacturing units, there is a special loan which is at a very concessionary rate, where people can replenish their transportation vehicles with new ones. In fact, without mentioning names, there's a major manufacturer in the garment sector who have already come to us, and they are actually recommending almost 200 of their transportation vehicles to be replaced with the modern good vehicles, making use of this loan. So I think there are initiatives like that to do that.